that some of the bonds, a number of them, are not. They're subject to federal taxes. The,
Yes.
and the coupon is rather low.
Well,
No, I'm just saying.
rates are low, yes.
Yeah, the coupon.
We do taxable bonds. Not all projects satisfy the low-income requirements. You know, the mayor's plan, just like the prior mayor's plan, have programs that deal with different income levels, and so not everything we do is tax-exempt eligible.
So you issued bonds for the mayor's housing program this year, or?
Yes, a great deal, yes.
Yeah. So, the Mitchell-Lama program, that's to the side, I guess.
Well,
Let's hear
we
that.
consistently work to preserve the existing Mitchell-Lama portfolio. So we're proud of the fact that most of the Mitchell-Lamas that are part of the city portfolio have been preserved. We continue to work with them to make sure that they can maintain quality housing and the like and still be very affordable. So we are always working. I mean, it's sort of like a never-ending story, which is a great thing because we really, there's always been concerns that Mitchell-Lamas will leave the program. And
Some
we work,
do,
and
occasionally.
some have, but we've worked very hard to do as many and to refinance as many as possible.
About how many Mitchell-Lama projects are there, sir, now?
We've refinanced over 40,000 units. Not including Co-op City, which we worked with the state on a refinancing for them where they got FHA insurance a few years ago. So, but within our portfolio, we've refinanced 43,000. We're working on another 10,000 or so units that are part of the city's portfolio. The state also has a very significant program to work with the old state portfolio. So we all continue to work very hard to maintain these units.
And what in the ladies' report, how much were the bonds for the affordable housing that you issued? What was the amount again?
For this year, it was 2.1 billion. 2.1 billion.
2.1, that's a little low, okay. I guess it's kind of hard to find spots to build it.
Well, I mean, it was a record-breaking year, actually, for new construction.
You did well.
And there are a lot of projects that are being financed, and you know, there's significant. The mayor's plan has significant capital from both the city and HDC. We use our profits to basically lend more money at significant discount in order to encourage more development. So, I mean, we're working as fast as we can.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's an ambitious agenda. I think a very, and you also help the housing authority.
We've done several transactions with the Housing Authority. We've done a capital fund program which allowed them to basically securitize federal monies to be able to deal with certain deferred maintenance issues. We've also worked with them in 2010 on a federalization program that basically allowed, it was a mixed finance with bonds and light tech, tax credits that is, to allow them to get resources to do repairs, plus also to tap into additional federal money. That's a very challenging area, the resources for the housing authority.
I could imagine, yeah. And your employees are members of the New York City Employees Retirement System?
Most. It's not a requirement. So
No.
Most people join, yes. And so we show the pension liability. It's relatively small in comparison to the
small
cities.
compared to,
and we also show our OPEB liability, which is also relatively small.
No, it's, there was something where you offer your employees something else too, don't you?
Yes, we have a 403B plan.
Oh, you have a you're able to get them a 403B rather than a 457?
Right.
So you with all those limits on it that the IRS has, it's still very good, I think.
Right. Yeah. No. And some employees prefer that. Others do both.
Some do both, so, yeah, very, very good.
Right.
And Hack is still active?
It's not very
know, it's the
active. There's
city
a few
money.
assets. We did.
I always remind you.
We did the Stuytown project. Hack can basically give grants in a way that HDC actually can't. So we used the Hack Authority in order to work with the city on the preservation of Stuytown. So
That
I'd like
was-
to ask, oh, sorry, Bernie.
Go ahead. I was just going to say that was the source of that was MAC funding.
yes,
MAC
initially,
had a
right,
lot
right.
of money about 30 years ago or 40. I lose track, and they couldn't. You know, they were either to reduce their debt service or somehow we worked out that we got that. But Hack is a good thing because you actually can support rentals.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I have other comments, but I was first married and lived in Stuyvesant Town. And I'm trying to understand why there was any city money necessary to support Stuyvesant Town and Peter Cooper.
Well, what was happening was that there was a purchaser coming in.
Oh, I know.
And there was a decision to basically create a regulatory agreement to cover over 5,000 units of housing there to to put a cap on rents. So the point was, the city, whenever it's dealing with affordability, basically pays for affordability through one means or another, whether it's through its tax exemptions or other means. It pays for affordability. It says, we want you to do affordability, and then we get something in return. In the case of Stuyvesant Town, there was significant subsidy given to it through both a mortgage recording tax exemption that came through our lending, and then basically a return of what they paid in transfer tax.
So it was subsidized housing for certain people.
For 5,000 units, that would have, so there'd be a certain percentage that would be capped at 80% AMI,
Okay.
and a certain percent that was capped at 150. And this was housing that over time had the potential to go to market rate. And so the idea was, and we basically bought affordability for a period of time. Well covered by the press, and I think it was pretty transparent what the city was trying to do. And there's been, in comparison to what had happened when the prior financing and sale had happened, where there was no protections for existing residents other than rent stabilization, this created a regime that sort of preserved affordability for a period of time. And that was an important decision of this administration that was different than the prior.
Okay,
It's
thank you.
Sure.
affordable housing
I forgot.
is such a demand in the city, and I guess it's your agency that's kind of the forefront on it. It sounds.
We're working with HPD.
Oh, that's right, I
The
forgot
mayor,
about- yeah, you're right.
the mayor's Department of Housing takes the lead. We like to think that we're part of we're clearly a part of the financing tools that are available and to access and to leverage other monies. We're also part of, I think, the brain trust that sort of helps develop housing policy for the city. So we work in tandem with the Department of Housing, but they have the primary responsibility, the mayor's commissioner and the like, and she's our chairperson, so we work very closely with her, and so that's sort of, so together we help formulate the plan with the mayor's office, the deputy mayor for housing and economic development, and so we all work together.
Where is your office, sir?
We're at 110 William, the same
110.
as EDC.
Go ahead.
I have a few questions. First of all, I guess it's my inexperience with this thing, but the concept of bonded, what is the word? You keep using it. Bonded loans. When you say bonded, what is that intended to convey?
It means that they've been pledged to bonds.
So it's secured by a pledge.
Right. Yes, we have a
that's what you're
statutory
talking about.
pledge.
Okay.
So not all of our loans are pledged.
No, I saw that.
But most are.
And the other question is, when you retire the debt early or defease it, in some of the other financial statements I've seen, it says that the accounting result was whatever it is.
It doesn't.
But the economic benefit
He
was
doesn't
listed,
defease much.
and you don't make that point.
He doesn't defease much.
Well, there's enough here to talk about it.
At least that's what he said.
No, I mean, we basically Defeasances are unusual. There's been a few instances of that. Usually, like the most recent defeasance we did was in relation to a financing we did for the Housing Authority. All of the financial benefits of that basically got subsumed in the new transaction. So, to be honest with you, defeasances today cost you money. You don't have savings. You have savings on the new debt, but the old debt, while you're sitting there, you often have there are
I
losses
understand,
to
but
that.
there's if there were not an economic benefit, you wouldn't do it.
That's true, but
So-
where we've done it, it's a pass-through to someone else. In this case, it was to the Housing Authority.
So you
We
get
didn't
no
have-
benefit
we
for
had
the
no
payoff.
benefit from
Okay,
it.
that's why you're
And that's highly, and we rarely do, economically now we don't do defeasances. What we do is sometimes we'll refinance debt to reduce the cost, but we usually don't go through the actual extra effort of defeasing. What we'll do is we'll hold cash for a period of time, and then when we first can call the bonds, we will.
Okay, that accounts for the difference in the way in which you refer to it. I have a few more questions. There's a reference on page 13 that
Page 13.
the increase was mainly due to setup of pension and other post-employment benefits. Is that, I couldn't understand, is that because that's the first time it happened? Or what's the setup referred to? Because I presume you had a pension for a long time.
Yeah, no, I just think that it was just a bigger increase to reflect the fact that
Well-
when we adopted the GASB rule regarding pensions, it's creating a little bit of a change for us and we're in the second year of that, and so that we're just seeing those costs flow through. So because it's not just the payment that we make to NYSERS, which we do, but also it reflects the accrued
The thing
liability.
that I found problematic was the word setup. It sounded
Okay,
like,
that's fair. We'll
Probably could be a leftover from last
It
year.
was the adoption of the new GASB
that's
resulted in the setup of the liability that was not there before, so that's probably why the word was.
well, it's not,
It won't be there next year.
Okay,
Because
well,
we will not have, we will have already completed the setup.
okay. I got little things here, but that's,
Michelle, I'm sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was just looking at your cash flow statement and was curious what cash flows were grouped into other receipts and other payments, just because those are fairly significant numbers.
Give him the page, Michelle.
Oh, sorry.
Page
It's page 18.
Right, so receipts include, we've done a swap with HFA, so that's on both sides of receipts and payments. We've done those for some of their deals. Also, it's funds that we've collected to cover the NYCHA debt service. And also our Citibank participation.
Yeah, and I can explain this. So what we did do at one point was sell a participation interest to Citibank that they would fund our 1% loans, and then they would put them back to us. It gave them an opportunity to get CRA. For us, it allowed us to manage our investments better. So this was a bit of a back and forth between us. It's a significant amount of money, but in effect, it's sort of we're on both sides of that transaction. So it looks like a lot more than it is because it shows on both.
In and out.
Yeah. But that was actually a relatively large program because we do so many 1% loans. That's ending now. It was priced at LIBOR and pure at LIBOR, and as LIBOR has gone up, it's less attractive for us. For a period of time, we were getting the difference between 1% and LIBOR, plus we were getting the spread on our investment income. So for us, it was a very attractive transaction, and for them,
It's changed.
they were doing it, but the nature of it changed. So we probably won't be continuing that.
Thank you.
And I think the original hack amount was $100 million.
That's right, and
It's been used, it's been used.
Exactly. So
You're using it for a very good thing, I think.
yes,
You're
yes.
really helping people. It's
And the similar program that we're now doing with Battery Park City is basically a takeoff on that. It's the same concept. What we do now HAC was set up to also do direct tenant payments. And that's something that, to be honest, the city has tried to stay away from. They see that as the federal responsibility, Section 8 and the like. And so HAC was able to do that. That program ends shortly. I think in the next 6 months we will have our last, what we call tenant assistance payments. But it was an unusual concept, and one that I don't think the city wants to continue. It creates, because as I said, we like to see that as the federal responsibility, the federal safety net, not so much the city.
Okay. Oh,
If I could ask you to look at the maturity schedule for investments. You got
what page?
What page?
Page 20.
Mm-hmm.
$184 million.
More than 10?
More than 10 years.
Yeah.
That's unusual in today's world.
No,
Well, we have significant reserves that are meant to be debt service reserves and other reserves. We've tried to do a little bit of a laddered attempt. Some of these are actually at relatively higher rates. We at one point bought a fair amount of callable agencies because we wanted to try to get a little bit more yield. And we have a few that go out a bit that haven't been called. And a couple of years ago, we experienced a bit of a negative impact from that. As the interest rate, as the yield curve has gotten flatter and a bit lower, our investments actually have proved to work out better for us. But it's a balancing. In the context of all of the agency's money, it's a relatively small amount that goes out that far. But we are trying to get a little bit of yield, and we're balanced, we think, in that approach.
do you
Okay.
have an investment advisor, sir, or committee, or do you are the one that does it?
No, I'm sorry. We work with a bunch of the brokerage houses and the
banks
like, and we have lots of banks and the like. So we're carefully tracking and the like, but we don't actually have a paid investment advisor.
Yeah.
We have different hired financial advisors for different tasks at the corporation, and then we also we have a steady stream of bankers coming in telling us all their wonderful ideas.
It's an open door.
We try. It's a little bit challenging. The rules have changed a bit with respect to that. I'm actually a member of the Municipal Securities Rulemaking Board, and the rules for all of that are complicated. And interestingly, I have a slightly different approach than other folks because we don't have a direct, what's called a registered, an IRMA. And so we don't have one, and so people have to sort of kind of suggest that they want to come in, and then we figure out a way for them to come in that meets the rules. I know the rules pretty well, though, so we're
Sounds
doing
like
okay.
you wrote them.
Well, we helped.
Very good.
Now, I see you have a whole bunch of money in banks,
Yes.
uninsured and uncollateralized.
What page are you on?
There's
I'm on page
actually
29.
Yeah, there's actually only I think a little bit that's uninsured and uncollateralized.
I'm looking
Most
at
of
the-
it is.
The maximum is 250,000, and and there's no reference here to collateralized.
Well, in the prior, most of our money market and now accounts are backed by either FHLB letters of credit or are collateralized. We have here, Kathy, can you just explain this? There's about 11 million that is.
Right, that's just, it's just cash. I mean, it's very, very short term, very liquid. It's things that basically are overnight, and at the time at 10/31, that's what it was. But
So
compared
it's
to our,
It's that
immaterial
short
pool.
that it
but
doesn't.
compared to our portfolio of 3.2 billion, it's really just
Nothing is material.
a little penny in the bucket.
But we also, those are at strong banks, so that we could try, and we have different CD accounts. We have a lot of different approaches. Everyone tries to sort of do the best they can in this environment. We're unusual in that we're so cash heavy because of the way we lend. We borrow up front and then we lend over time because that's the way we finance our projects. And so we're I think an unusual agency in how much cash we have at any given point in time. It's a constant flow in and out, but it's a lot, and it's tricky.
Mr. Chairman. It's more of a
Yes, go ahead,
macroeconomic
Scott.
question. Are you guys anticipating, with the changing interest rates, that are you changing your strategy or your theory as far as how you bond and how you spend your money or how you save your money?
Yes. I think we've been conscious of that all along. We have a significant amount, and I think we sort of mimic the city on this in that we do like floating rate, and it has been a very powerful tool for us to have floating rate debt over the last 8 years. It's part of the reason why if you look at the corporation's financial condition over the last 8 years, when most of the world went upside down, we just plowed ahead and did extraordinarily well. And that's partly through that. Because of the amount of cash we have, plus the amount of floating rate debt, we think we're appropriately balanced. As far as if long-term rates were to go higher, it would create a bit of a stress for us with projects that we're financing. We currently don't see that. We do agree that short-term rates will likely go up in the next 2 years, but to be honest with you, that's been pushed a year or two for a long time now. During that period, we have some hedges to protect ourselves. We have a few interest rate caps for basically very severe events, but beyond that, we think that we're appropriately balanced. But we're very conscious of it, and what we've been able to do, as I said, is make a lot of money during this period of time, which has been plowed back into more projects. And so during that period, we've also locked in a lot of interest rate spread, and that will allow us to continue to be able to support the mayor's programs. I mean, one of the tricky things when you have an agency that continues from one mayor to the next mayor is that idea of keeping resources available to you want to support what their goals are as best you can without tanking the agency, and so we're trying to be balanced, and we think we've hit it correctly. You'll let us know if we're not.
It begs the question, people will buy your debt with so low a coupon, I guess.
Yes. Yes, and housing bonds are very interesting because they're usually sold at par, not the city sells a lot of debt that is premium bonds because people want a bigger coupon.
You don't have to.
Well, it's just, it doesn't work well with housing. The city can almost always determine that it's going to refund debt. For us, we have projects that may not be, we're kind of locked in for a period of time. It's very different, and so it's harder in the housing area, and so we pay, in a different level, we pay higher rates than the city. And one of the things that I've become very interested in is that in looking at the market for our bonds, shortly after they're sold, we see a change, and that I think that in the secondary market, people treat our bonds like they're the city's bonds. Our prices get much, much closer after we issue. When we sell, there's a big difference, 90 bip difference between us and the city. Shortly thereafter, it shrinks, and I think it's one of the things that my new
perceive
obsession.
it as city debt, yeah.
Because we're a strong credit too.
Yes,
We're
you have
double
a
A
strong
plus.
credit rating, sure.
What was your spread in your basis points that you were just mentioning?
That's the difference between when the city issues GO debt and when we issue.
And what was that spread you just mentioned?
It was 90, and actually
90?
I think that's wrong. It's actually a little bit less. It's probably about 65. 90 is the difference between MMD, which is sort of the overall spread. The city usually prices a little bit higher than MMD. We price higher than the city. It's a challenge for us. It's partly the nature of housing. It got a bad name in the financial crisis. It also is subject to calls that are different than the city because if an accident happens and building blows up, God forbid, then it gets called. Or if it doesn't get built, it gets called. And so there are different provisions in our bonds that are unusual.
I'm sorry, you raised what is a fascinating anomaly, the fact that your bonds in the secondary market are having returns much closer to the city than at the time that you issue them. Is that common for the housing bond market, or is that unique to you?
I mean, I'm looking into it. I mentioned the MSRB, so I've been tracking more, and I've asked a bunch of our bankers to look more closely at it, because it is an interesting question, and it raises sort of questions about how our bonds are being marketed and sold, especially
and possible
primary
market
and
manipulation.
secondary. Yeah. So, I'm on it. It is something that I've noticed recently. One of the things that we did, like the city, we have a sort of a homepage at Emma, so it's much easier to track transactions. And although we're not anywhere nearly as big an issuer as the city, we are a significant, in the housing field we are, and we're a significant player, and there are a lot of transactions going on. It's something, as I said, it's become my mini obsession in the last 6 months, so we're working on it.
I'd be interested if you would share with the audit committee any information you
Sure.
glean on that.
Right.
You have a whole batch of debt that you do with the Citigroup.
Yeah.
Whole batch. Is that
What page?
it's on page 65 around there. Are those competitively priced, or does somebody at Citigroup have some kind of an arrangement in which they're the exclusive provider?
What happens there is projects arrange their own construction lending, and Citibank's structure is different than our other banks. So when you look overall at who our construction lenders are, HDC doesn't take construction risk. It depends on banks to take construction risk. And so other banks usually provide letters of credit, and we do it in our traditional programs. Citibank, for a variety of reasons relating to how it's viewed by its regulators, which is different than, let's say, JP Morgan, Bank of America, or Wells, likes this back-to-back structure. In doing this, we have a pricing advisor, and we actually get on the phone with the controller's office as well, who participate in all of these pricings to ensure that we're getting appropriate pricing for these. But this is a specific kind of structured debt that allows Citibank to get lending credit, which is important for Community Reinvestment Act purposes. So it's very specific to them. But when we look overall at our lenders, they're not a bigger lender than, let's say, B of A, Chase. Those are, and Wells. Those are our four biggest, and there's Bank of New York, Capital One. We do have, lenders, kind of across the gamut.
That answers my question. Thank you.
Right.
The stuff sells like hotcakes, I guess. I don't know. I'm beginning to think so. Yeah,
We've done well. Thank you.
It's really amazing.
I'm looking for a not immediately I'm sorry, Mr.
I'm
Chairman.
sorry.
You got some microphone.
I'm looking for a not immediately finding your GASB 72 disclosures. Where is that?
Give him the page, Michelle.
No, I'm looking for the page, sir.
I'm sorry.
There was a new GASB that I believe they implemented this year, and I'm just curious. You didn't implement yet. Are you going to be implementing 72 this year?
That's in the process, yeah.
We're
that will be in the
currently
process.
reviewing it with our auditors, and we assume when we complete our audit for 2016 that will, be addressed.
Thank you.
You may not want to use setup language when you incorporate those figures.
And you say the deputy mayor for housing and economic development is on your board?
No, the housing commissioner is our chairperson. So we meet regularly with the deputy mayor to review what we're doing. We do a joint meeting with HPD with the deputy mayor. But the housing commissioner, the HPD commissioner, is the chairperson of our board by statute.
Okay.
As is the other two members from the mayor's cabinet are the budget director and the director of the commissioner of finance.
Good.
Do you have your own audit committee?
We do. We do.
I have nothing else to ask. I don't think so.
Gotcha.
Go
Mr.
ahead.
Chairman, one more. I'm sorry to harp on this, but I'm a little surprised that you did not implement 72 at the same time that the city did. Normally, we announce to all of the component units what statements we're planning to implement with the hope and expectation that you will follow suit.
Well, with our fiscal year being October 31st, I think it was.
But
for
that
fiscal years
follows the city.
beginning after, so that's after the city, so that's why
Before.
Right.
Got it.
So-
Thank you.
So we'll follow this in this June,
we always have that
the June.
adoption
Got
between
it.
our
I
fiscal
think it's
year
the
and the
end
city.
Yes,
the end
thank
of
you.
the
And that happened with OPEB and with the
Pension.
pension. I mean,
Okay.
we trailed you, just because we
Because
on some
of
level
timing.
needed you to do things
Yes.
in order for us
Yes,
to.
certainly for pension
remember
and
those.
OPEB. Yes, sir, I will. I stand corrected. Thank you.
Never corrected.
And I guess there are certain nonprofits that your debt is a required investment, I suppose.
Different people have invested with us. We created this new category called Sustainable Neighborhood Bonds. The hope is that we'll get more interest from people who are interested in social impact and the like, and green. It's sort of, we kind of created it as a broader category. We're hoping that it'll gain some traction, but we believe any way for us to increase the attractiveness of our debt,
Of course.
increases our, reduces the cost of capital.
Are there any more questions?
No, I'll
of these
leave you
people?
with this.
Okay.
All right, if not, thank you very much. Thank you,
you, sir.
Mr. Nelson. It was a nice set of statements. Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Never capitalized the incident.
The next one is the
sense.
post-employment benefits, yeah.
Take off my jacket. No. I had a share of these guys, yeah. That he's a very effective presenter of their position. Knowledgeable, obviously. That's what you get out of lawyers, right? Oh, she switched sides on us.
Hiya, John.
Hi, Bernie. How are you?
Oh, this is OPEB.
Good
huh?
morning, everyone.
Morning, all.
Good morning.
Excuse, maybe we, go ahead. Maybe you should
Okay,
all
there we go.
introduce yourself.
I am Nicole Fleming. I'm the Director of Accounting Services at the Mayor's Office of Management and Budget. To my left is Steve Valoric. He oversees the OPEB investments at Comptroller's Office of
Such
Bureau
as
of
they
Asset Management.
Okay.
He's here on David Jutter's part today. To my right is Simone Sawak. She's the Deputy Assistant Director of the Miscellaneous Budget at OMB, essentially oversees the day-to-day aspects of the OPEB plan. To her right is Mr. John Gibney, the Deputy
Deputy Chief
Chief
Actuary.
Actuary.
Of the City Office of the Actuary.
And
and
the
I-
other two
I
gentlemen
have,
are from your office?
Frankie Chen and Anderson Nguyen from the Valuation Services Division staff of the Office of the Actuary with me this morning. Thank you.
So, I am pleased to say that the city, for the second year in a row, contributed an additional contribution of $955 million, which is by and large the bulk of the year-over-year change that you see in the financial statements. All other things have pretty much remained constant, which is also something that I'm actually pleased to say, because I think it's atypical for me to sit here and say that the city's managed to maintain benefit payments at a fairly level pace year over year. So that's really the bulk of the activity in the trust for the year. So at this point,
Are the prepayments going to continue every year now?
well, in the exec plan, the latest exec plan, we have $250 million as an additional contribution for the
For
next
16.
fiscal year.
In the current fiscal
16
year.
to 17.
Yes.
It's a drop in the bucket. $1. It's not even the interest on it.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nicole and I guess John, I just had one question. On page 6, where you talk about the new bases, you talk about the change resulting from experience gains and the impact of certain OPEB-specific actuarial assumptions. What assumptions were changed?
The city last year agreed to reduced welfare fund payments And by that, I mean they agreed to increase the welfare fund payments by $25 a year for fiscal year 14, 15, 16, and 17. 15, 16, 17, and 18.
Correct.
Excuse me. That's right. I apologize. July 1st, 14, July 1st, 15, July 1st. So in our OPEB valuation, we have a trend rate for the welfare fund benefit payments. And we replaced the 4 ensuing fiscal years with $25 increases.
Which was less aggressive. Which was less aggressive than the previous assumptions.
I like to use a $1,700 annual contribution on behalf of the welfare fund contribution on behalf of each member.
Don't they vary, John?
They do, Bernie, but they're about $1,700
Okay.
on average.
right.
If you look at the report, 1680, 1720, so.
Okay.
But 1,700 is an easier number to work with.
I'll buy your number.
So a 5% increase would be $85. So $85 compounded over 4 years is
Versus
significantly
20.
higher than $25 over a 4-year period of time.
And then I would just
And that-
comment that in the prior year, the explanation was a little fuller. You might want to include the kind of detail that Mr. Gibney provided in the MD&A
That's
in
a
the
good
future.
point, thank you.
Keep your fingers crossed, that's all.
Just one comment on page 15,
Page 15?
the investments. I guess we're used to seeing this more in a table type of format than bullets.
It can be presented in either format.
I think it's just easier to read in a table.
Okay.
I was discussing
Okay.
with Michelle and with someone else at the table that if the city needed money, could they invade this trust?
They have.
No. So
Why do you say no?
by definition, the trust is a legally separate entity from the city of New York, and the city cannot make use of the assets within the trust for any purpose other than to pay other post-employment benefits.
And where is that written, dear?
It's in the trust agreement. It's in the
trust
document
agreement.
itself.
I think what Bernie's working on is at one point, I thought we saw something where the city took $1 billion out of
That's right.
the OPEB funding.
Basically what happens is they just.
It's
you
not-
have to pay the
You don't
bills.
reimburse.
I think
So
it's
I understand.
important to make this clear. One, because it's a legal issue, and two, because it's the impetus of the creation of the trust and the legal separation in the first place. The city can never make use of any dollar that is ever put into the trust for any purpose other than other post-employment benefits.
Other than retiree health benefits?
Correct. The distinction I believe you're attempting to make is that it can choose to contribute less to the trust in a fiscal year. But once the money is put into the trust, it
can't
cannot be
use.
used for any other purpose.
Okay.
I was surprised they increased to $250 million. There are a lot of calls on city money, be it this year, next year. I was very, very surprised that they reduced the general reserve from 300 to 50, and they took the resulting 250 and put it into this. You almost think that the city looks upon this like another reserve. And maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't know. But this pays the Medicare Part B premiums, the wealth fund.
It pays the, for most of the retirees, it pays the health care benefits and reimburses the Medicare Part B payments.
And of course, if the city doesn't put enough money in, it becomes pay-as-you-go. It becomes a charge to the current fringe benefit
That's correct.
accounts.
The city's annual requirement is the pay-as-you-go payment. So,
You have a lot of money in there. I'd like to see it come out, other than for the fringe benefits.
It was set up
Pardon me?
initially, it was set up initially
Yeah.
recognizing that long term unfunded liability, which is in the $70 billion range, and the city was continuously criticized.
Yeah, wow.
Because we had a liability that we weren't addressing, which in other entities were being required to report it on their statements, and the creation of this entity was a means to move forward in this slightly more conservative method. So I think over the last 3 or 4 years, modest amounts of money have been deposited in this account, which leaves a relatively modest reserve over that very large liability. There's a little over $3 billion against the number in the tens of billions of dollars.
Less than 5%.
I tell you, things do change. When I was active, would testify. Every time there was a change in the Medicare Part B amount, I had to go over and testify, but we never reimbursed the full amount. We reimbursed about half. Of course, I said retirees can afford to pick up the rest, really.
But I think it's
And I got beaten up like the dickens by the council. And then when I was retired, the deputy mayor, who's a friend of mine, Mark Shaw, said they had to do this, and they went and offered it. But
I think in this case, though, there's a large current year health insurance liability.
oh, of course,
And the city could, in fact, absorb that whole liability out of this reserve. And if they're in a fiscal situation that they need to take that amount of money from some other source, we're in pretty bad shape.
yeah.
So I think it allows them flexibility, at the same time accumulating some money against a very long-term liability.
Go ahead, Mr. Khan.
On page 19, at the bottom on the healthcare cost trend rate, seeing how the cost of healthcare is a significant component of your liabilities and costs, on what basis are you making the assumption that healthcare costs, especially in the pre-Medicare space, are going to drop 0.5 percentage point every year? Like, that just seems...
Which chart are you referring to?
at the bottom of the page,
Page,
Mr.
okay.
Chairman, it's
Each of the assumptions are reviewed every year, and we do look at short-term fluctuations as well as long-term fluctuations. The important number there is the ultimate number, the 5% number. Now,
The last number?
yes, sir.
Of course, it was more than, if it remained high, we'd only be paying health insurance premiums.
That's very
This
true.
is,
Yes, sir. Now, the last time the health assumption was adjusted was with the implementation of the Affordable Care Act.
Okay. I was going to say that. Yeah, I was
That's,
going to mention that.
now, the city has since implemented a number of initiatives that have dampened many of the premiums that the city pays. Not all of them, but many of them. And you can look at a year-by-year comparison, and some only increase by 1 or 2%, but some actually increase by about 10%.
right.
So we do study each of them every year, and in fact, in the upcoming year, fiscal year 16, we'll address the welfare fund assumption. We're actually going to lower it from 5% to 3.5%. So we do look at them every year, but we don't think that there's a need to make a change in the short-term assumption as long as the ultimate assumption of 5% remains viable, and these are very consistent with what other large employers and other large municipalities do. Not that we base what we do on what other large insurers or municipalities do.
If
Go ahead,
I'm
Mr.
sorry,
Khan.
sir. If past this prologue, how have your estimates compared to with reality if we go
Well,
back?
we've been all over the lot. We sometimes
okay.
have large
Have we ever been
losses,
over?
and some, yes, sir, we
We've been
have.
over?
And
All over.
there's I don't know if it's in here, the historic annual OPEB cost, which was negative last year, but has been as high as more than $11 billion. It should on average be between 6 and 7 billion.
A
And
year?
it's been, yes, sir. You have a normal cost component, which is a little over 3, and an interest on your unfunded, which is a little more than 3. So you're between 6 and 7 should be your annual OPEB cost.
And that was so.
We've had several years where it was 10, 11 billion, and now we have years where it's much lower. We look at them very carefully every year and make adjustments as we see
Yeah.
fit.
Father Knickerbocker is a very good father. How many private sector companies, when you're 65, will do anything for you?
Well,
They'll say,
that-
go on Medicare, right?
I believe that's correct, yes, sir.
I'm sure it is.
So,
I'm sure it is. But, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry,
I guess
John.
I'm just curious as to the savings plan that the
Mhm.
city's currently enacting.
Right.
And, I know that when you make these actuarial forecasts of out-year medical costs, you look at a variety of things. But how are you reflecting this health cost savings plan in your forecast?
It's reflected primarily in we call them the unit costs, the value of the premiums that we, or the amount of the premiums that we value each year. So I haven't seen what they are as of January 1st,
I guess I'm just curious.
Go ahead.
I've asked this question several years in a
You
row, and
did,
it's
yes,
been,
that's correct.
we're waiting to see that it actually becomes true, and now we are seeing some significant historical accomplishment equal to the plan, and our expectation is that accomplishment of savings is going to continue into the future years as planned. And I guess I'm just, because if you look at like a national average and what's going on in a national average or a regional medical cost index, you're going to see the average of all of the providers' costs, rather than if you take one particular system, which might, due to lack of attention in prior years, have a certain amount of extraordinary inefficiencies, and now this administration is reducing those efficiencies, probably to bring it more in line with the average, but stepping down from where those costs were to aligning them with a regional average is going to, for some period of time, lower the cost increase on a year-over-year basis. And is that reflected in your forecast is really what I'm asking.
It's not directly reflected in our forecasts other than the starting point. So last year our starting point reflected our trend rates. This year our starting point reflects the actual rates.
Right.
We try not to knee-jerk react. For example, the $25 increases to the welfare fund payments, there's a $100 additional lump sum this year.
Fiscal 17.
What's that? Fiscal 17. So we see them initially, but how really sustainable are they? I don't know that at this point. There's still so much uncertainty with what's going on with exchanges, with what's going on in the.
But I'm just talking about the.
I understand.
Specific, and I guess the answer to my question is that reflected? Is it not reflected?
It's reflected.
It might be.
It is reflected in the experience that we see year over year, but it hasn't. Aside from the welfare fund assumptions, we haven't addressed the trend assumption to I think what you're asking me is, are we going to lower the trend assumption? That's what it sounds like.
I guess basically every year, based on an actual result, that will be resetting the base year, and that's how it will be reflected.
That's correct.
I've always asked this question.
Yes,
the
you
women in
have.
city government case. But you ignore that, don't you, when it comes to gender?
Say that again, please.
The women in city government,
Okay.
where you cannot distinguish, yet you have to when you're rate setting, don't you?
Not when we're rate setting. We use it in our actuarial assumptions, our
Assumptions,
mortality assumption,
Yeah.
primarily in our mortality assumption.
Also on the long-term liability here, in reference to a comment about age, a very large portion of this liability is associated with the uniformed forces, right? Because
Yes,
we're
sir.
paying a lot of health insurance for people who are substantially under 65.
That's correct.
Following along on that, a few years ago, we came out with a new tier for the uniform officers, which is reducing costs on a pension basis, and also, I believe, is resulting, or what the assumption was, that some of those people would work longer because of that. Is that impact beginning to be reflected through this long-time liability, or you haven't seen enough data yet to reflect it?
That's correct. We have not yet.
So it's a standard answer. We haven't seen enough data to reflect the savings because of the pension changes.
In fact, there are no. For example, we've only had, prior to this past year, one fireman who was not Tier 1 or Tier 2 because of the lawsuit. And for some of the NICERS groups, while the retirement benefit is smaller, and while the contribution that they make to the retirement system is larger, when they go out, really hasn't
Hasn't occurred yet, but the presumption is in the design of the system that it will impact that.
Well, it may, but we haven't addressed pension side of the issue, therefore we can't reflect it in the OPEB side of the.
But
of
the point
of
is
equation.
that even though actions have been taken legislatively or otherwise to reduce these costs, because it takes time to see the legislative actions flow through, none of those proposed savings are yet in any of these numbers.
Aside from in the changes to our welfare fund trend and in the actual premiums that we value year
Right.
over year.
But the thing that's required to really impact these numbers are generally longer-term legislative changes. Therefore, even though people have acted, we haven't as yet. For the reason that you say it takes a while to see it impacted, those savings are not included in any of the long-term projections.
That's correct.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one more suggestion on the page 20, where you reference the Silver Book's availability on the Office of the Actuary's website. You might want to include the address, the actual web address, and for the PDF version, a link.
And on page 22, the supplemental information, that covered payroll is for the retirees.
No, sir, that is the covered payroll of the active members who are expected to receive benefits, retiree medical benefits in the future.
The big number is the percentage.
So the 20 bit,
I believe the city's payroll is about $25 billion. And the 20
oh, this is in
billion.
thousands. Stop, I got it, stop.
I'm good with
It
stop.
seems a shame we can't take, it seems a shame we can't take money out if we need it, but that's me. Do we have any more questions for these good people? Thank you, Nicole. Thank you, John, as always.
sir, Bernie.
Very helpful. And thank Deloitte for a good set of statements. Oh, what's that, the controllers? At least I was able to hear Nicole this time. This one was easier. He's terrific, John. I like him very much.
Bernie's right. You take these costs and project them out.
That's ridiculous.
I agree.
Oh, it's ridiculous.
I remember when I first discussed
Benefits or
both.
the amount?
It's ridiculous. This whole business is ridiculous.
Here we are. This is the fun part.
Good morning. You want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hi, good morning. I'm Marjorie Land. I'm the Deputy Controller for Audit, and I have with me this morning Faggy Hornick, who is Director of Special Audits and Audits and Special Reports. They are special audits, too. Alma Fana, who is the Assistant Deputy Controller for Financial Audit, and Ed Carey, who is the Assistant Deputy Controller for Management Audit. And I just want to start by thanking you very much for allowing us to come here and talk about our fiscal 15 audits. So, you have our annual report, so you can see from it some of the highlights, which are that in fiscal 15, we put out a total of 80 audits and reports in the fiscal year. Of those, 54 were GAGAS audits, Yellowbrook audits, and 16 were additional. They were also GAGAS audits, but they were letter reports. And we had 6 special reports and 4 claims, making up the total. We calculated based on those reports that we had nearly $1 million in actual savings and revenue, $944,000. Our potential savings was $615 million, unusually high figure, which I'll talk about in a minute. And claims are the cost avoidance, around $200,000. As I think you know from past years from the Bureau's presentations, our charge is to look at every city agency. We audit them every 4 years. We are doing what are programmatic audits in the main, although some, as indicated by our unit titles, have more of a financial focus, others have more of an operational focus. And this is the first year I get to be here with a full year of audits where I've been deputy controller. And I've really been privileged to work with this group of managers and the people underneath them who have just vast years of experience doing this for the city of New York. We have had a real focus on contract oversight, looking at the ways in which, since so much of the city's business is contracted out through private vendors, our own people watch our money. We have a fiscal responsibility. Our agencies have a fiscal responsibility. We're eager to help instill the view that it's not other people's money, it's our money, and we ought to be managing our contracts the same way we manage our private construction contractor to renovate our kitchen. You know, you want to know everything that's being spent. Doesn't always happen. So the focus that we've had in the last fiscal year and moving on, waste, fraud, and abuse in the larger sense, public safety, the efficiency of our programs, and they're actually achieving the goals that the agency set out to achieve, franchises, concessions, enforcement of local laws. And then we had a particular focus in fiscal 15 from our controller on the Housing Authority, on NYCHA. So I had a whole series of audits on NYCHA that continued into the following fiscal year. We have not lost that focus, but we've moved into also other areas. But we just had a group that came out, and the NYCHA audits in part account for that very large figure in terms of the money that are potential savings.
They were 93% of the figure.
Yes.
I took
Yes.
a look at it.
Yes, it is, and that's, you know, and those numbers.
It's bigger than a bread box.
Yes, and the interesting thing is the big part of that number, that bread box there, it has to do with one particular program that the federal government has it's a real twofer. It's a financial savings for the housing authorities, but it's also an energy efficiency program. So we're really trying to do a fiscal good, encourage the housing authorities, you know, NYCHA being preeminent as one of the oldest housing stock, the oldest housing authority in the country, so with some of the greatest needs to really refurbish and reduce their operating costs. I mean, the bills for utilities at NYCHA are astronomical. So it's part of that, encouraging them to do that by giving them the ability to take some of those savings. So that was one of the programs we looked at in our sort of financial and operating audit we did. And we saw that they had initially put in plans with HUD to do well over $300 million worth of energy savings. At the end of the day, what they finally submitted and had reported was $18 million. And
How much?
18, 1-8.
300.
Yeah, at the 300, it's more than 300, 350 roughly. And
Yeah,
that,
it was like 471 million was the potential revenue that you.
yeah, well, that was all in for, yeah. So with that one, though, what was remarkable in that audit is we took a look at other housing authorities, and we saw Lowell Housing Authority captured a lot more money than NYCHA. That, you know, Lowell, Massachusetts didn't make a lot of sense on a per unit basis.
To
And
decrease their utility expenses.
exactly. Yeah, and they have a whole, it's a complicated formula. NYCHA thought they knew better than HUD about how to do it. HUD rejected the plans. Well, one of the things that HUD had rejected about the plans NYCHA originally had, we recommended they follow. They did, and in the following year, they put in a plan that was accepted for $100 million. So it's not the 400 million, but it's a lot better than 18 million. So we take some credit on that of pointing out they ought to.
They put that in 16.
Yeah. Yeah, that followed up within the next year. So we don't claim that as an actual revenue because it hasn't been realized yet, but they at least have that plan accepted, and that was exactly what we had advised them they should have done in the first place. So among the other things, the other audits we did with NYCHA, which I think were pretty dramatic, was our audit of their inventory controls. Which was really an oxymoron, we found, and they actually agreed with us. There were no controls. And that was one of the few since I've been here where in this case, the chair of NYCHA said, we agree, we'll stand with you at the press conference because we're doing everything you've recommended. And they did that off of the preliminary draft that we sent them. And they knew they had a problem. And they, the best we can tell, we're not involved in this ourselves now, but working mightily to try to correct the problems. It's been a historical, issue for them, and
They may have stuff that just doesn't move, right, in the storehouses?
there's a combination of things. You have an overstock of parts for an icebox. I mean, I'm exaggerating, but not by much. I mean, antiquated fixtures and products that have no utility whatsoever, because while, a company like Amazon can ship worldwide overnight and always know what the inventory is, somehow the housing authority can't figure out what kind of light bulbs they're using and what the right parts of the washers, on a sink. And you end up with a great mismatch and a waste, an extraordinary waste of money. So we also looked a lot, as I mentioned, at contract oversight, and one of the preeminent audits in that area was of the Build It Back program that followed Hurricane Sandy, and that is one that just had a very glaring set of numbers at the outset when you had upwards of 19,000 homeowners applying for benefits, and after a year and a half, they had even just begun giving out benefits to no more than 685 people.
That was the Section 8 benefits?
This is not Section 8. This is the Build It Back program. This is where
Okay.
they did a quick rapid repair just to get plywood over your windows so you can get back in your house in one working bathroom. But this is what followed up to do permanent renovations, and they got several $1 billion from the federal government to do it. And nonetheless couldn't figure out how to get that money out the door. So we did a really in-depth audit of how that program had functioned and not functioned. And it was a very sad story of everyone delegating to somebody else who had no interest. The private vendors who were responsible for carrying out the program had all the wrong financial incentives. There were no financial incentives to moving quickly and efficiently, and every financial incentive for moving slowly and inefficiently, paying the least to the least workers. They contracted out 3 levels down to actually be the call takers. They were paying minimum wage for people without high school diplomas or with GEDs. What they were supposed to be paying for was people with bachelor's degrees, with customer service experience, preferably with some kind of human services experience, and they would have had to pay more, but every penny they paid to those people came out of their bottom line. So funny thing, they paid fewer of them, and they paid them less, and they were less qualified. And, it was really, it's a textbook on how not to design a project and how not to oversee it. The mayor's office, housing recovery office, took the responsibilities and handed them to a private vendor who said, we don't know how to do this. And they said, it's okay, just take care of it. And then didn't look back. They're doing it quite differently now, as best we can tell. We haven't gone back for the follow-up, but they've certainly, their representations to us at the time we gave them this audit is we've addressed all these problems. We hope they have. We really would like the city to take a lesson from this in the way they design contracts and the way they oversee the contracts, because this is, hundreds of millions of dollars that at a loss, and people's lives. People still can't get back in their homes. We also looked at the Section 8 program in both NYCHA and HUD from a point of view of, first, are you complying with the minimal requirements? They're not minimal, but the basic requirements that the HUD has for ensuring that you only have eligible people receiving the benefits. It's very important. It's a zero-sum game. There are not enough benefits for the number of people who get them. New York is desperate to keep getting more in the metropolitan area. They are vital given the cost of housing right now in the city. And so eligibility is a big deal. For every person who's fraudulently getting a Section 8, that's somebody who deserves it who's not getting it. And we found, which was a good thing, that both HPD and NYCHA do, in fact, follow the guidelines quite well. The problem is that there's a lot that could be done extra. And we went over and above. We did a bunch of matches with just city employees, which was remarkable, with marriage records, death records. I mean, some fairly...
While living in...
Sure.
No, You had city employees
Yes.
living under Section 8?
Absolutely. And there's many who are eligible.
No, I'm
But-
not saying.
Yeah, but what we found is city employees who weren't identifying themselves as married, putting people in, that you'll see them as a beneficiary on the health insurance, but you won't see them as a, on the lease or their income being included in the Section 8 benefits. We found people who owned, we looked at ACRIS property records, people who owned multifamily homes, multiple homes, lived elsewhere, rented out the Section 8s. These were not hard matches to do. Obviously you get a lot of false positives, and so you have to do further investigation. So we've handed it off back to both NYCHA and HPD and to the Department of Investigation to look deeper. But these are some basic things we can do to ensure the integrity of the program. And both agencies were appreciative and looking to do a little bit more because these are such valuable commodities.
Those two agencies just about take care of the whole 600 million, I think.
Yes. Oh, yeah. They absolutely do.
There's other stuff, but...
Yeah. We also focused on public safety in a whole variety of arenas, and one of the more dramatic audits we did in that regard was an audit related to the high-risk construction oversight program. Now back 5 years ago when cranes were falling, in a short period, we had several substantial crane accidents. Department of Buildings did what every agency does. They hired a consultant to go and design a study, and then they hired them to carry out the study and make sure that their recommendations were implemented. So we followed up now 3 years later originally to see how well they had done implementing the recommendations, and much to our surprise and disappointment, our engineers found that the Department of Buildings consultants' statistics about how many of the recommendations had been complied with were very different than ours. They were taking credit for complying with things using statutes that had actually been enacted prior to their recommendations. So, there were a lot of things that were quite iffy. So we worked very hard trying to convince the buildings department they should be monitoring this better. And, we're pretty horrified to see another crane accident. And it's not that these things would necessarily have addressed them, but safety is such a vital part of what they do. There is so much construction going on in this city, and the notion that a crane might not have been adequately secured for wind is troubling. So we're hoping that they will be a little bit more vigilant going forward. And then we do continue with what are emotionally a favorite audit of mine, because I am a long-term city government employee, which are the ones that look very small, but I think are very meaningful. Our Controller's Directive 1 audits, where we're looking at compliance with very basic operational programs within every agency, compliance with local laws. We've looked at, we spoke about, I did last year when I came here, the environmental recycling laws. We've now started looking at English language access. You'll see in the next year we've got another series. These are basic things that agencies should do. They're enacted by the council. They're enacted with, I think, a really important design, and it's, I think, helpful for every new commissioner to come in and say, oh, I have to do this too, and we like being able to do those. And if you have any questions, I'm happy to
So
respond.
the Housing Authority, you feel is doing a little better, or they're still...
I think they're struggling. I think they're really struggling. I do, they responded very well to the later series of audits. When we first started, they were very resistant. And, it's a new commissioner and a new chair, rather, and, she's got to listen to the people she's got around her. But I think time has told, and they are making real attempts to do reforms. We hope they can. We hope someone gets them more money, too.
Let me ask you, you're very kind. You send me, as the chairman, copies of these things. Sometimes I read them. What's with the Sunstone Hotel in Times Square?
That is I think, a really interesting audit.
I think it's a crazy one. I mean, it's back and forth.
Well, that was, I think it is it was a good process with EDC. We do hope they listened to what we said that we didn't agree with at the end of the day. They convinced us to some things on the accounting. It was very technical. But what we really remain convinced of, and I think the audit demonstrates, that because of some of the calculations they haven't done right at the outset, the out years, there's a real potential for losing quite a bit of money. Because this is a long-term, So our estimate, it's over $4 million. This is, out to the end.
And the hotel was completed.
And the hotel's completed, right? But there's still the payments.
Your office, right, yeah.
I look at it every day.
Yeah.
So, and their excuse in a way was, oh, look, we got handed these things. We didn't do this, right? We just got a package. We're trying to dig out, out from under what we were given, and they as much as acknowledged it wasn't all done as carefully as it should have been. So we're giving them an opportunity to take a look, reevaluate, and hopefully change up the accounting structure in some ways that will make a difference going forward.
I have a couple little things and one some big things. First of all, there are a number of instances here. If I were running a company, the people who engaged in it would be looking for a new job. Where is the discipline that follows the kind of reports you're issuing? And what follow-up is there at the managerial level to the absolutely horrendous performance?
Yeah, I wish when you say questions like that, I could be the commissioner of every agency at that moment to change things up. We can only do as the audit bureau, give them the information, give them the recommendations, and then in some number of cases, the controller himself will use his bully pulpit to try to embarrass or, cajole an agency into actually following up. It happens sometimes. It really does. I think there are areas like NYCHA. I think there's been some changes. I feel like our audits have helped contribute.
I have to recuse myself. I'm just a member of the audit committee of NYCHA.
Well, I hope so. But in addition, other areas that we've been working at, homeless services is another one.
Then let me make an observation, because when I had the audit committee of the Board of Ed, we got the audit committee asked for the principals who had lousy reports to come in, and we beat them up. And the one team, he said, I never had a grade like this in my life, and the next year he got an A, not a D. Can we help by, if the committee is willing, to invite one or more of the people with the terrible reports here to explain their behavior? I would be happy to vote yes for that.
I will take that back, and I think that's a fabulous idea. I mean, as I said, I've been in city government now 30 years, and I have been represented city agencies, and I've helped to manage a city agency, and now I'm auditing them. I feel very strongly that accountability is hugely important. It's really crucial.
I found it unsatisfactory. First of all, when you show how many recommendations you make and they agree, unless they're numbered, there's no way of a reader can tell which of the ones are agreed and not, because they're just bullet points.
Right.
I suggest next year you think about doing that.
Yeah.
But when I read it, I was, as a former manager of things, there would be people who would be in serious trouble if they got a report like this. And if they're not, then we as an oversight group are failing.
Yeah.
I would like you to think about it.
I think it's a great suggestion.
Yeah.
What was that, Mike?
I guess the same thing.
Yeah.
Then
So
I think you have probably a consensus here that you pick the worst offenders and get them here.
In addition to that, it would also be helpful for me if there was an interim between all the detail and the very broad summary that's on the top, because I'm pretty familiar with a lot of these topics, but I got kind of bogged down by the time I was halfway through reading this. If in fact, right on the front page it said that the Housing Authority was most of that.
Right.
And the other thing that I think would be helpful is there's a lot of agencies here, but a number of the issues follow in a lot of places. If there could be some kind of a summary up front telling the issue, and it follows across all of these agencies. Because I'm looking at George over there. I would really kind of like to have that interim document and then talk to the Office of Operations, who I know is very involved with these and following up with agencies and what have you. But if we had that kind of middle ground, I think it would also have a better discussion for the oversight agencies and how to get down to this, whether it be the Office of Operations
Yep.
or OMB or someone else has more of a oversight or supervisor. That document would help them a lot.
And I do think that was requested last year, so that is, I apologize, because that's on me for not having followed up. And I have to admit to you, when I started preparing for this, looking through, I went, oh my, I could have used it. And I worked in every one of these, so, and it really does make a difference. We have done a lot of thinking about
You
this.
don't have to wait till next year. If we could get
Yeah.
that on this report, we could still use it.
Yeah, I actually think it is. I think it's a great suggestion, and on July 1, I will turn to it. We're going to try to get through the end of the fiscal year for ourselves, but quite seriously, I think it is, and I think it's important because this should not be, like the proverbial, pebble down a well, right? This actually can, if there's some appropriate follow-up, it would really be important. And sometimes in the agencies they do. And it is one of the things that we're attempting to do now. I can't say it wasn't done before, but I really have a zeal for is the follow-up on these audit recommendations. Because simply relying on the agency to say, oh yeah, we're complying. I mean, the high-risk construction oversight audit is a real poster child for that. You have to look behind. Yes, we're following what you said to, well, what are you actually doing? And did you implement it? And is it working? And we're trying to do a good deal more of that.
Could you briefly explain, sometimes you say audit report, sometimes a letter report? What's the distinction?
They are both GAGAS audits. We sometimes use a shortened form, particularly where the report is going to be quite small, within a couple of pages. And so going through the whole structure with an executive summary that's going to be as long as the audit report itself doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. So we have used those, particularly we do them with, use them a lot on the local law 36 audits because those are fairly, yeah, exactly. Those you'll see. In the main, our other audits will be full reports, but the difference really is not tacking on an executive summary. The content's the same. The standards are exactly the same.
And also, just to follow up on the recommendation statuses that you have at the back, there's one that says basically number of recommendations not implemented, but it doesn't say what they refuse to implement or what's in the process of being implemented.
Right. If we give the detail, which I think is a very, very
do it,
important thing to do, both for you but for us, because it's going to help keep us focused.
Especially the
when we're
ones
going
where
back.
they refute, as Mark had said, like if we could be involved and pushing
Right.
them to implement them.
Yeah.
Let me just add, I think there are certain circumstances where agencies agree with and make a determination to follow the recommendation of the audit, and there are occasions where the agency disagrees with the conclusion and feels that the audit missed something or got something factually wrong, and that is the basis of their decision to not follow the recommendation. So I think that I think you can tell from looking at the numbers in the table in the back of the report that the preponderance is, across all agencies, mostly agree with recommendations and are saying they're going to follow them. However,
Mostly.
there are occasions, like if you look at a couple agencies, it doesn't look like that. Some agencies, there's a lot of recommendations. It seems like they're doing 3/4 of them rather than all of them. And then there are a few where they're not following the recommendation. So the why is missing, and it would be interesting to see.
Yeah, I actually think that's a very fair point, and I will not want to come back next year and have to say, oops, forgot it again. So we will get you an interim report, and I think being more focused on the recommendations as well. It's going to help us as well as helping
I wish
you.
to tweak you just a little bit.
Yes.
You talk about the environmental aspects of things, yet in each of the reports that deal with the same thing, you repeat the language for each agency. There ought to be something that you could save 5 pieces of paper by standardizing the response, because unless there's some difference, it's just amusing to me. That's all.
Point taken. Yeah, we do kill trees. Try to minimize that. I like the electronic distribution now. I think is a great thing.
I like the fact that the Housing Authority has has come back and is doing so much better on collecting revenue, and they do need it, so.
There's a new broom over there.
There is, and we do see that.
I confess, there's a meeting of the audit committee next week. I intend to use this at that meeting.
I'm glad to hear that.
Are there any other questions? If not, thank you. Thank you very
All right,
much
thank
for
you.
the presentation, and thank you, people. We really appreciate it. Good. Yeah.
What's next?
At this point, I think we want to go into executive session, so I'd like to make a motion to move
I
in.
second the motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Session, and for the record, I'd like to thank the presentation by Graham Thorne, and the regular meeting, if there's no new business or old business, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Thank you. Thank you again. We'll see you on the 22nd.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Good luck.